Hello and welcome back, football fans, as we now have reached the third and final part of our series chronicling the career of the great Reggie White, the Minister of Defense. If you haven't seen the first two parts, I suggest you watch them now. The links are in the description. But where we last left you, Reggie White had an incredible 8-season dominant run as a member of the Philadelphia Eagles from 1985 to 1992. However, the organization was in a bit of disarray, and the NFL's ongoing battle on the subject of free agency resulted in a class action suit, which Reggie was a big part of. Eventually, the settlement was reached, and it set a new precedent when it came to unrestricted free agency, an impact that is still felt to this very day. And on April 7, 1993, White signed with the Green Bay Packers for a year's $17 million. White at that point had become the hottest free agent in NFL history, as he was the first to truly be courted by an open market. The Eagles didn't seem to care enough to make him much of an offer, but certainly the other 27 teams at the time were falling all over themselves for a chance to just obtain him. Obviously, not all teams were in the top running. White got the royal treatment, however, in trips to Cleveland and Atlanta, while the Redskins wanted to rebuild their defense, and the high-powered 49ers looked to replace Charles Haley. But it was the building Green Bay Packers that lucked out. Football fans in the frozen tundra of Green Bay were hyped for the arrival of Reggie White. It was often something that I say when making these videos, when a popular player reaches a new team, but it's true. In its brand new Packers jersey with White's name on it, and the familiar number 92 were just flying off the racks. Some were shocked that Reggie even chose Green Bay to begin with. The Packers were once a proud dynasty, a team whose history dated all the way back to 1919. Lambeau Field is named after the team's founder, Curly Lambeau. The team was a dominant force in the NFL. They won 5 championships between 1929 and 1939. In the 1960s, they had a dynasty led by the great football mind known as Coach Vince Lombardi, and the Packers won 5 NFL championships and the first 2 Super Bowls. Then things went to hell. From 1967 to 92, just 2 playoff appearances in the years of 1972 and 1982. However, things changed when former Raiders scout Ron Wolf became the team's GM in 1991. He no longer was going to let this club stay stagnant. In 1992, he made 2 major moves, hired a new head coach named Mike Holmgren, who had 2 Super Bowl rings as part of the 49ers coaching staff in his first head coaching job. And he traded for a QB that the Atlanta Falcons couldn't care less about by the name of Brett Favre, a star quarterback out of Southern Miss. In 1992, the Packers barely missed out on a wild-card spot for the playoffs, and Favre made the Pro Bowl for the very first time. Wolf and Holmgren knew that they had quite a good offense on their hands, even though they still needed some tweaks as well, mainly with their running game. But they did have a promising fullback in Edgar Bennett, and hoping first-rounder Darrell Thompson would evolve. Spoiler, he did not. They had a very talented receiving core led by Pro Bowler Sterling Sharp, and added Miami Dolphins Pro Bowl receiver Mark Clayton, and had a great blocking tight end in Mark Chmura. They had a pretty decent offensive line led by center Frank Winters and veteran Ken Rudigers, and added Steelers Pro Bowl tackle Tunk Ilkin, and had rookie tackle Earl Dotson. But now what about the defense? And Reggie, his history with the Eagles showed that if you build a defense around him, great things will happen. The Green Bay defense was ranked 15th in 1992, which is pretty much in the middle. Not great, not terrible. Well, it certainly didn't hurt that Bill Moss was on the defensive line with Reggie White. He was another big steal for the Packers. This was a huge part of the Chiefs for 9 seasons. So already the Packers didn't waste time trying to complement what White could do. The linebacking core had fan favorite Johnny Holland, who was in his 7th season, but it was a very young core highlighted by Bryce Pop. Well, their secondary was considered somewhat weak. They had young talent by the name of Leroy Butler, who had yet to really get into his best years, and a former college star, Terrell Buckley, but they did add a veteran, Mike Pryor. Basically, it was a young team with many steals of veterans to give them depth and leadership, and of course, Reggie. On September 5th, 1993, Reggie White made his debut as a Green Bay Packer, getting a rousing ovation as they began what was their 75th anniversary in the 1993 season. But they had laid some games in Milwaukee County Stadium. This was one of them. The Packers held the Rams to just 228 yards of offense, and Reggie was putting high-octane pressure on QB Jim Everett, and was one of the many reasons why the veteran threw 24 incompletions, and Reggie also went toe-to-toe a few times with a rookie playing his first game by the name of Jerome Bettis at running back. White made an immediate impact. Reggie then made his debut at Lambeau Field to another rousing reception, and as luck would have it, he was facing his former team for the first time, the Philadelphia Eagles. And Reggie indeed showed no mercy to former teammate Randall Cunningham, hitting him several times and even recording his sack. But Cunningham, however, played a beauty, and the Packers blew a 17-7 lead as their offense was shut down by Philly defense, which was still formidable even without their star, as former teammates Seth Joyner and Eric Allen played big games. Reggie was all over former teammate and former target Jim McMahon, who was now a Minnesota Viking, with the Packers' mortal enemies to boot. In a game between the two heated rivals, as Favre again struggled, but the Pack had a 1-point lead but lost thanks to a field goal in the dying seconds. And then the Packers' losing streak went to 3 games and an ugly loss to the defending Super Bowl champion Dallas Cowboys, a familiar foe of White all those years playing in the NFC East. And while he as well as Bryce Popp and George Kuntz all gave Troy Aikman a hurting, the Packers were decimated 36-14 as their puzzling offensive struggles had many scratching their heads. And Reggie was playing well, so was their defense as a whole. You could see why they were responding to them. However, they were more aggressive, more determined. You could see that he was a game changer. But be that as it may, the Packers were still 1-3, and White wasn't really criticized, but still faced a slight scrutiny on a small scale, and well, our hero, like he usually does, was about to step it up. The Packers now had to contend with a very talented Denver Broncos squad, of course led by future Hall of Fame quarterback John Elway. The Packers dominated the first half of this game, and it looked great, leading 17-0 at the first quarter, and then 30-7 at the half. And our hero had sacked Elway, and he was causing the star QB to make many mistakes and terrible incompletions. But then Elway, like he is known to do, started an epic comeback, and the Packers were falling apart. And suddenly, late in the fourth quarter, the Broncos only trailed 30-27, and they now had the ball. This is where Elway shines. However, cue the minister. He sacks Elway not once, but twice in the dying minutes. The Broncos can't get in the field goal range. They have to get the ball up, and the Packers hang on to win. A huge clutch performance from our hero, and again, just showing how great this man really is. Not only did this performance save the game, but he stopped John Elway, the man notorious for comeback wins. And hey, the chants that were heard at Veterans Stadium for many years were now heard at Lambeau Field. Reggie, Reggie, Reggie. This was a defining moment that truly told the entire world Reggie White is a Green Bay Packer. He's now part of the special football community in Wisconsin. His performance, again, was gracing highlight reels. After a bye week, the Packers rode momentum of Reggie's performance in a dominant 37-14 win over the lowly Buccaneers, where the pass rush was on a whole new level and the media took notice again. He was making the players around him better. Need further proof of that? Well, the Packers sacked QB Jim Harbaugh 7 times, and our hero had 2 of them in a 17-3 win. The Packers have now won 3 in a row, and Reg is doing what he was brought there to do, and then some. Green Bay's hot streak, however, came to an end at the hands of the Kansas City Chiefs, 23-16. But oddly enough, Dave Krieg, who Reggie had faced a few times and was one of the most sacked quarterbacks in NFL history at this point, Reggie never really got to him in his career, and he finally did hit him with a sack in this game for the very first time. However, just a minor setback for the Pack, because boom! Another 3-game winning streak. It began with an exciting 1917 win over the New Orleans Saints on the road. Reggie had another 2 sacks, these 2 on Wade Wilson. A huge 26-17 win over their division rivals, the Detroit Lions. Indeed, the Lions were having a big year, but Reggie not only made Rodney Pete's night miserable, but he and the Pack held Barry Sanders to under 100 yards, and in this era, that's pretty damn good. The Bucs this time put up a fight, but a late-game drive from Favre wins it. The Packers are staying hot. And hey, fans are eager. Playoffs are possible. This team has been a laughingstock for years. They're actually tied with the Detroit Lions at 7-4 in the NFC Central, but due to having the better division record, they were leading. Fans were eager. But the Packers would lose a very important game, and their cushion is deflated by division rival Chicago, who wasn't pushed around this time, and in the playoff hunt themselves, tying Green Bay's 7-5 record with a 30-17 win. But they can breathe a sigh of relief as Reg and the defense help keep the Chargers from notching too many points and went on the road 20-13 and moved to 8-5. But oh boy, it's another loss to their nemesis, the Minnesota Vikings, They fall to 8-6 as the defensive line plays their worst game of the year, and Reg has not registered a sack in the last 3 games. And they soon had to contend with the LA Raiders, and guess who their starting quarterback was? Jeff Hostetler. Being on a different team and wearing a different uniform ain't going to protect you, Mr. Hostetler. The Packers defense was on a roll, and Reggie was not only reacquainting himself with Mr. Hostetler, and also making sure 38-year-old veteran backup QB Vince Evans also gets to his rocking chair quick enough. And with the Packers up 14-0, our hero picks up a fumble, but seeing LeRoy Butler coming in behind him, he laterals to the speedy Butler, who runs it in from 25 yards, and Butler leaps into the Lambeau stands. Wait a minute. Leap? Lambeau? Is there something there? Oh, I think there is. The Packers win 28-0, a huge game for our hero. 2.5 sacks and a big lateral play, and oh yes, the Packers clinch the playoffs. The first time since 1982. The Minnesota defense might as well have another nickname, the Game Changer. The Packers have a chance to clinch their first division title since 1972, and they and the Detroit Lions have punched their playoff tickets respectively, and the Packers hold a 20-16 lead in the fourth quarter, and despite sitting out Barry Sanders, who was also battling injuries, the Lions make a comeback and win 30-20. The Packers finish 9-7, but faith among the Packer faithful has been restored. Reggie, you are the man. And well, would you look at that? In the first playoff battle since 1982, it's their division rivals, the NFC Central champions, the Detroit Lions, who are the third-seeded division winners, meaning they get home field in the wild card round. So the Packers' first trip to the playoffs wasn't going to be an easy one. Of course, anyone likely watching this knows the Lions' big star was Barry Sanders, the very definition of a generational talent, and Eric Kramer was their quarterback, and he was still reliable enough, it seemed. They had a very talented receiver in Herman Moore, who was close to 1,000 yards receiving that year, and a tight end, former Bengals Pro Bowler Rodney Holman. Their offensive line was led by the great Bill Fralick, who was picked up from the Lions. Robert Porcher was their top weapon on the defensive line, and Pat Swilling, the former Defensive Player of the Year for the New Orleans Saints in 1991, led the linebacking core. Their secondary led by safety Benny Blades. Cool name. The Lions were smart at eating the clock, so smart, in fact, that they ate up 10 minutes in the first quarter, but were only able to garner a field goal. But either way, they led 3-0 after the first quarter. Reggie and the defense were doing everything they could, even as Sanders was having a great game. In the second quarter, Favre responded an 80-yard drive that led to a 12-yard Sterling Sharp touchdown. The Pack led 7-3. But the Lions, pardon the pun, roared back and took a 10-7 lead, led after a 95-yard drive, and that was the score at the half. Our hero and the defense were playing a great game, as he was constantly in the face of Kramer and managed to sack him. But in the third quarter, it was looking bleak. Buried deep in their own zone, Favre throws a costly interception, returned by Mel Jenkins, 15 yards for a touchdown. The Lions lead 17-7. But the Packers are not quitters. Favre finds Sharp yet again, this time for 28 yards out, and the Packers close the gap to 17-14. But it looks bad. The Lions are driving, but in a shocking turn of events, George Teague intercepts the ball in the end zone and runs it out for 101 yards for a touchdown. The Silverdome is silenced. The Packers suddenly lead. The Lions shake it out in the fourth quarter. They take the lead. The defense is, however, tightening up, and our hero gets another sack. But this time is ticking on the Packers and their season, and with 55 seconds to play, Favre darts the ball 40 yards into the end zone, into the waiting arms of Sterling Sharp, and the defense stops the Lions as they attempt to get back in, and the Packers win. The Packers win. A huge, huge win. Our hero plays a beauty of the game. As Detroit had the ball the majority of the game, they didn't tire, and our hero and others truly starred. The Packers, for the first time since 1982 as well, make the divisional round. The game was considered to be a classic, truly a pivotal moment in Packers history. Ooh, and oh boy. The very team that knocked Reggie out of the playoffs last year when they beat the Eagles, the defending Super Bowl champion Dallas Cowboys. Yep, the gang is all here. Aikman, Emmett, Irvin, Leon, Nate, Norton Jr., D. Woodson, and of course, led by the two double J's, Jones and Johnson. Well, the Packers were a determined bunch, ready to take it to the league's dominant force, and Aikman faced a great deal of pressure as he, of course, was very familiar with our hero, and he and the offensive line were doing what they could to contain him. And the Packers did lead 3-0 after the first quarter. Hey, things look great. They were able to, that was all they were able to get, however, after 2 Dallas turnovers. And the Cowboys took a 7-3 lead in the second quarter and shocked the Packers with 10 more quick points and led 17-3 at the half. After taking a 24-3 lead in the third quarter, the Packers tried to make a game of it, but it mattered very little. The dominant Cowboys just continued to pave another path to another championship that year, winning this one 27-17. Reggie didn't get a sack on Aikman, but was pressuring him most of the game, and the Packers didn't so much play bad as the Cowboys were just too damn good. Reggie was leading the Pack on a path that they were just beginning, and fans still had a lot to be happy about in Green Bay for the first time in many years, and our hero was a big reason for that. Reggie in his first year as a Packer had 13 sacks, and all but 3 were either on future Hall of Famers or former and future Pro Bowlers. Indeed, his biggest target that year was that epic clutch performance against Denver where he took John Elway down 3 times and stalled a trademark Elway comeback from happening. In the obscure file, Vince Evans, a 16-year pro veteran who White played against in the USFL and had taken down a couple times, while former teammate Randall Cunningham probably became thankful for all the years Reg was on his side. Also, Jeff Hostetler and Reggie White may have both left the NFC East and are on different conferences, and yet he still could not save himself, poor guy. However, this was the first year in Reg's career he didn't register a sack against a top 10 offensive line team, as the Packers only faced 2 of the top 10 teams. White also had 2 sacks in the playoffs, destroying Eric Kramer of the Lions. And for the 6th time in 9 seasons, White finished in the top 5 in sacks, tied for 4th along with veteran Sean Jones and Saints fan favorite Ronaldo Turnbull, but only just 2 back of Neil Smith, who led the league. The Packers were tied for the 4th most sacks in the NFL this season. They were 22nd overall in 1992. White came in second for Defensive Player of the Year voting. Many feel he should have won due to his value of the Packers and the immediate impact he made, which changed their fortunes. And with that, Reggie White's historic first year of the Packers comes to an end. And what a year it was! Not only did his free agent signing set new precedents, but he lived up to his reputation as a game changer and likely even exceeded it in some ways. The defense improved drastically under him, and the Packers team as a whole was responding to his arrival. So make that an 8th straight Pro Bowl selection and his 2nd straight second team All-Pro selection, meaning he has been an all-team pro all but his rookie year thus far. And of course, leading the team to their first playoff appearance and win since 1982. The football and sports world were seeing the revival of football in Green Bay. Despite what revisionist history might try to tell you, Brett Favre wasn't the one to bring mainstream attention to Green Bay. Oh sure, he was a big reason for the team's growth in popularity, and eventually would become a star himself, but there's no question about it that Reggie White was already a huge star across the league during his tenure with the Eagles. He brought eyes to Green Bay, and in turn, Favre became a star as well due to the attention, because he could show a wider audience how good he was. Favre's arrival and great play was certainly key in their rise, but White truly put them on another level. And in 1994, hopes were high in Green Bay, and you saw that White was tied in sacks last year with a man by the name of Sean Jones. Jones was a grossly underrated defensive end who was drowned out due to the tension due to the likes of course, our hero, plus also Richard Dent, Mark Gastineau, Bruce Smith, and, well, a few others. But now he was going to be playing on the same defensive line with Reggie White, and with 10 NFL seasons under his belt, with the Raiders and most notably Houston, he brings experience and depth and can complement Reggie on the opposite end. And they also add another veteran, part of that infamous Chicago Bears defense from the mid-'80s, 14-year veteran Steve Mongo McMichael, a 2-time Pro Bowler and twice each a first-team and second-team All-Pro. The Packers team looked poised to be a whole new threat in the NFC. The Packers defense and our hero was enough to beat on the Minnesota Vikings, as after failing to get to him in the past, Reggie smothers Warren Moon like a clingy spouse and gets him in a 16-10 win. However, they lose 24-14 to the Dolphins as Reg and the gang did not put enough pressure on Dan Marino. Reggie's former team was again standing across from him, and while Cunningham took a beating, Favre took a bigger one, and the Eagles won 13-7. The Packers then rebounded with the destruction of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 30-3, as starter Craig Erickson will now scream and tear anytime someone mentions the number 92. And Reggie welcomes the first overall pick and sophomore Drew Bledsoe to the NFL. Isn't he nice? I mean, yeah, he really is, but, well, I mean, you know what I'm trying to say. But the Pack lost 17-16 due to a late field goal. The Packers got back on winning track with a 24-17 win over the Rams. Our hero and the rest of the defense was making life miserable for Chris Miller. Reg and the gang made Warren Moon run as fast as his legs could go, and at times it wasn't enough. So now Reg has 6 sacks in 7 games and is playing very well, but they drop a heartbreaking 13-10 loss in overtime. Also, they get a scare when Brett Favre is hurt and backup Mark Brunell had to come into the game. And much criticism is hitting the Pack for their inconsistency and being deemed one of the NFL's biggest disappointments early in the season. But they then roared back with a huge 33-6 win over their division rival Chicago, who they had fallen behind. The Pack then held off a comeback from their other central rivals, the Lions. Reg and company held Barry Sanders to just 45 yards. And they won 17-10 over the Jets for their 3rd straight win. Reg didn't register a sack in this streak, but he was playing beautifully and was key on the pass rush, was still being successful in Green Bay as a whole. The Pack are now looking like the team they were touted to be this year, but then things go the opposite direction, a 3-game losing streak. Despite being down 24-0, they did make a bid for a comeback, but fell short against the Buffalo Bills, losing 29-20. Despite having leads of 17-3 and 24-13, the Packers were unable to pull off a huge win against 2-time defending Super Bowl champions Dallas and lost 42-31. But White did get to backup quarterback Jason Garrett in for Troy Aikman. After they lost a crucial game, blowing a 14-3 lead early, losing 34-31 to the Lions despite meeting Dave Krieg and, well, taking it to him, it wasn't enough. And our hero was playing just fine. He even faced some criticism that was pretty much unfair. Though the Packers' pass rush wasn't as dominant as it was the year prior, they sat at 6-7 with 3 games to go. It was looking pretty bleak, but not completely hopeless. And indeed, oh yes, they go on another 3-game winning streak to end the season, yet again mauling the Bears, this time 40-3. And then a wild 21-17 win over the Atlanta Falcons. And playoffs were here again, oh yes, with a 34-19 win over the Bucs. And again, Reggie played well, but didn't register any sacks in the stretch, but the Packers did make the playoffs in back-to-back seasons for the first time since 1967. And hey, would you look at that? Once again, awaiting them in the playoffs, the Detroit Lions. The big change, however, is at quarterback, and veteran and former Pro Bowler Dave Krieg at the helm. The Lions also had one of the best blocking cores in the league, and the Packers are also hosting a playoff game at Lambeau Field for the first time since 1982. They haven't lost one at home since 1964. The strategy is simple: smother Sanders. The Packers had also had lost Sterling Sharp for good, as his career had sadly come to an end due to a severe neck injury. But early on, the strategy was working. Sanders wasn't gaining anything. Literally. And on a 76-yard drive, Favre was nearly perfect as it culminated in a 3-yard touchdown run from promising running back Dorsey Levens. The pressure our hero and others were giving was tremendous, as the linebacking core was giving Barry Sanders the worst day of his career. It remained 7-0 after the first quarter. And despite a missed field goal in the second, Chris Jack made up for it when the dying minutes of the second quarter, and the Packers now lead 10-0 at the half. Sanders might as well have been running in quicksand. He may have even gotten more yards if that was the case, because that's, well, yeah, pretty much shows how he was playing. The Lions got back in it, however, and trailed by a touchdown with 10-3, but the Pack restored their 10-point lead with another field goal, 13-3 after 3 quarters. The Lions as a whole were pretty much inept, because Krieg was indeed sacked once by our hero and made many mistakes. But the Lions still got one back and closed the gap to 3 points. The game ain't over yet. The Pack, however, made it 16-10 with just 5:35 to play. The Lions drove the ball and were ready to complete a comeback. And the Lions were down by the Green Bay 11 as time was ticking down. Sanders gains 2 yards, might have been one of his best plays of the day. Incomplete pass by Krieg, then sacked by Bryce Hop, and then incomplete to Herman Moore. The Pack run up the clock by giving up a safety with no time left, a 16-12 win. And our hero was great, but as the defense as a whole, that again was built around him, put on a clinic. They held the most phenomenal running back and arguably the most phenomenal player in the game to -1 yard, and the entire Lions offense to under 200. Now the Pack get another shot at the division round. And, yep, the 2-time defending Super Bowl champion Dallas Cowboys, but the Packers will lead in their boys. Well, all the belief in the world is not going to help them here. The Dallas Cowboys would decimate the Packers 35-9 in a game that was pretty much over at halftime. Our hero was largely ineffective as for the third straight year, dating back to his last year with the Eagles in '92. He suffers a loss at the hands of the NFL's most dominant force. However, speaking of dominance, it actually came to an end, at least temporarily, after they lost the NFC Championship to the San Francisco 49ers, who indeed went on to win the Super Bowl. White had 8 sacks this year, a career low, but regardless, despite the stat, he still had another fantastic year, and the caliber of quarterbacks he was taking down were top-notch. All but 2 sacks were either on that year's Pro Bowlers, former Pro Bowlers, or Hall of Fame QBs. 3 of the 8 sacks came against top 10 offensive lines of the Cowboys, Patriots, and Lions. His favorite targets were Hall of Famer Warren Moon, who was in his first year with the Vikings after nearly a decade in Houston, as was former Falcons star Chris Miller, who was also brought down twice. It had been years since Reggie had brought him down. Young star Drew Bledsoe, old star Dave Craig were also in number 92's sights, while Erickson and Garrett rounded out. White also got to Craig in the wild card round of the playoffs, where the Packers beat the Lions for the second straight year. White didn't fare as well in Defensive Player of the Year voting as he did the year before, only notching 1 vote, but for the 7th time and now 10 NFL seasons, he notches at least a vote. White, of course, made the Pro Bowl for the 9th straight time, and was again a second-team All-Pro for the 3rd straight year. His biggest accomplishment, however, is that the NFL celebrated their 75th anniversary that season, and he was named to their all-time team. Some saw this year as another good one for the Packers, but not a whole lot of progression over the prior season. Well, our hero took a little bit of criticism, unfair to be fair, as his stats, as always, are just part of the story, but again, the Packers' production on the pass rush did decrease. Reggie White, much like he did in Philly, was endearing himself to the community in Green Bay. His personality and charm, not to mention the fact that they saw him as the hero that they'd been seeking for many years, also helped. Reggie may have called Tennessee his home, but Philly and Green Bay had also become adopted homes of his because his qualities made it that way. He was someone kids could look up to. He was someone adults loved to cheer. He truly was a portrait of football in Green Bay. The Packers going into 1995 had to tackle an elephant in the room, the loss of Sterling Sharp. They were hoping to get something from third-round draft pick Antonio Freeman and, of course, Robert Brooks. They also had a growing running game with Edgar Bennett and Dorsey Levens. They still have tight end Mark Chmura, who is producing, and a pretty good offensive line led by veteran Ken Rudigers. Some feel that where things went wrong was the defensive line. No, bear with me here. Basically, they said that Reggie wasn't really the problem. It's just how old it was as a whole, and he was somewhat being lumped in that category. Sean Jones and Mongo, however, the latter of whom retired, were both quite up there in years in terms of football age, that is. But now a new fan favorite was about to emerge in the defensive line over the next couple of years. His name was Gilbert Brown. However, White, along with Mongo, would actually be in the corner of Lawrence Taylor at WrestleMania 11 as LT made his way into the wrestling world in early 1995. I mentioned that in the Lawrence Taylor video. Please check it out. And it wouldn't be our hero's first foray into the squared circle either. Or, sorry, I should say it wouldn't be his last foray into the squared circle. We'll get to that a little bit later. But he had a bigger fish to fry, trying to make the Packers into a Super Bowl contender. But the team also suffered another huge loss on defense. That was Bryce Pop going to Buffalo. Well, the season began right for our hero, but not for the Packers as a whole. The Packers' pass rush, led by Reg, was in the face of Chris Miller all day long, and White committed 2.5 sacks. And the Pack held the St. Louis Rams to barely 200 yards of offense, but couldn't get the ball in the end zone and lost 17-14. But the Packers became unleashed, and our hero was brilliant against the Chicago Bears, led by Jim Williams. White was pushing through him like wet paper, and while it didn't come easy actually getting to Eric Kramer, he did, and the Packers won 27-24. A familiar foe yet much different Giants team was next, and the Packers were able to scrape it out, as our hero and the defense put on heavy pressure on Giants quarterback Dave Brown, a main reason for him throwing 27 incompletions. And Reggie was nice enough to welcome former Packer teammate Mark Brunell and the expansion Jaguars to the league, as Brunell was brutalized by the Pack and our hero. And our hero seemed to be the only one even getting in the social distance space of Troy Aikman of the Dallas Cowboys in their offensive line, the second best in the league. And Eric Williams had to use every fiber of his being to keep Reg at bay, but our hero still got to Aikman for a sack. But again, the Cowboys beat the Pack 34-24. The Pack nearly blew a 20-0 lead, however, against the division rival Detroit Lions, but they were still able to win 30-21. They followed that up with a huge win over their hated rivals, the Minnesota Vikings, and poor Warren Moon, Reggie making him long for those cruel Alberta winters when he played for the Canadian Football League in Edmonton. Reggie was showing that extra something this year. Some were comparing him to the Reggie White of 1987. He seemed to be in almost every defensive play in some way, shape, or form, and the Packers at 5-2 were close to getting to the next step. However, on the road, as part of this home series, they played the Lions and Vikings again and would lose both times. The latter lost due to a last-second field goal, but he did get to Moon, but they fell to 5-4. Despite the losses, the Packers were still in good shape. Reggie's role of leadership and showing that at nearly 34 years old he was still as ageless as ever still gave hope to the Packer faithful. And it started with a 35-28 win over rival Chicago. Reg was a machine, driving Eric Kramer out of the pocket, and the top-notch O-line of the Bears just couldn't contain him. And he made Vinny Testaverde run for his life and got to back up Eric Zaire in a 31-20 win over the Cleveland Browns. He and fellow veteran Sean Jones were both zeroing it on both ends of Trent Dilfer in a 35-13 win over the Bucks. And they made it 4 in a row as Reg barreled down on quarterback Jeff Blake, Pro Bowler that is, and a red-hot Bengals team trying to make a run for the playoffs, as Reggie went toe-to-toe in a grueling score-off with veteran and fan favorite Joe Walter, as the Bengals also have one of the best blocking cores in the league. White was playing with such intensity, aggression, and heart, in addition to easy for me to say, statistically producing. There was talk that he'd be a top candidate to win Defensive Player of the Year for a second time, and the Packers at 9-4 were on the verge of clinching the playoffs for the third straight year, again for the first time since 1967, which was also the last time they won the Super Bowl, and looking for their first division title since, well, 1982. Even though there's an asterisk beside that because of the strike that year, but I digress. However, they ran into a very determined Buccaneers squad, but that wasn't the story here. Reggie White, who suffered a minor injury in the win over the Bengals, for the first time in his 11-season career, misses a game. This caused concern for Packers fans, and it was shocking to say the least, as White was never really prone to injury, big or small, throughout his career. The Bucs won in overtime 13-10. They too were clinging to playoff hopes. What? I'm not kidding. He returned but didn't see a lot of action against the New Orleans Saints. However, they were able to down them 34-23. The Packers, sitting at 10-5, were heading to the playoffs, no doubt, but they could now take the division with a win over the Pittsburgh Steelers. Our hero was ready for action. The Steelers' offensive line kept Neil O'Donnell well protected most of the game, though Bob Krubesky took him down once. On 4th down, on the Green Bay 6, with 11 seconds to play, the Steelers could win it and play spoiler. But Yancey Thigpen drops O'Donnell's pass in the end zone. The Green Bay Packers are division champions! Division champions! Division champions! The fans at Lambeau go wild as the growth people were expecting from this Packers club is coming to fruition. Our hero's Packer prophecy was a step closer to coming true. However, being the third best first-place team meant they still had to play in the wildcard round, but at least they'd have home field advantage. And they would be facing a rising Atlanta Falcons club, coached by June Jones and led by perennial headache yet somewhat talented quarterback Jeff George. You also had the brute of the backfield, Craig Ironhead Hayward, one of the most dangerous offensive threats at the time, Eric Metcalf, and star receiver Terrence Mathis. On the defensive side of things, well, they had one of Reggie's contemporaries and one of the all-time great defensive ends in his own right, Chris Dolman, and Pro Bowl linebacker Jesse Tuggle. On top of that, our hero didn't start the game and saw limited playtime as his health again raised eyebrows, but he was still very much in this game. Lambeau Field was the site and the Packers were ready, although our hero's health was brought up several times by the media, and it didn't look good early. The Packers had squandered a turnover, missed a field goal, and the Falcons had shocked them as George hit Metcalf for a huge 65-yard touchdown. But then a long kick return from Freeman put the Packers in great field position, and they tied the game after Bennett ran up the middle 8 yards for a touchdown. Freeman, who was on fire, made a huge punt return, eventually setting up Favre's 14-yard touchdown to the Brooks. It's 14-7 for the Pack after one quarter. The Falcons did get back in it, however, with a Morton Anderson field goal trailed by 4. Cue Antonio Freeman. A 76-yard punt return for a touchdown, and despite the field cover, the Packers led 20-10. And then a 14-play, 85-yard drive by the Packers, culminating in Favre finding Chamura in the end zone, made it 27-10 at halftime. After a scoreless third quarter, the Falcons closed the gap to 10 points, 27-17 in the fourth, but they kept making mistake after mistake after mistake. The Pack capitalized and won 37-20. Well, Reggie played well in the action that he did see, putting the pressure on Jeff George, but the hero on defense this day was Sean Jones and Leroy Butler, and the story of the game was rookie Antonio Freeman. But of course, naysayers were quick to say the Packers winning the wildcard round is nothing new. Well, again, they're right. This is the third straight year they've won the round, and there was a problem. Our hero, well, he was still playing hurt, but he would still be there the next week. Well, if the media pundits and analysts were looking for the Packers to have a test, well, now here it is. The defending Super Bowl champions and NFC West champion San Francisco 49ers. Well, with Reg not 100%, nobody was giving the Packers much of a chance. So who got this 49ers team? Let's see. Steve Young, check. Jerry Rice, check. Brett Jones, check. And, well, there you go. And wait, the defense. Dana Stubblefield, check. Lee Woodall, check. Ken Norton Jr., check. Oh, and the secondary of Eric Davis and Merton Hanks, check. Coached by George Seifert, double check. Yeah, this is going to be difficult. And it looked rough early. Despite killing 7 minutes off the opening drive, a field goal attempted by Jack was blocked, and in a stroke of luck, the Niners fumbled the ball, however, thanks to a hit from Wayne Simmons, who had become a huge part of this Packers defense. Craig Newsome picked it up and ran it 31 yards out, and the Packers draw first blood. Steve Young was getting swarmed. Our hero was in his shadows, and the Pack went up 14-0, and the Niners couldn't get anything going whatsoever. That's how the first quarter would end. And then imagine the shock of many when the Packers made it 21-0 as Farrell found Chimura from 13 yards out. What is happening here? I'm loving it. The Niners, however, did get a field goal, but the Pack led 21-3 at the half. The Niners, however, closed the gap thanks to Steve Young doing what he does best, strategically picking apart a defense, and it was 21-10. The Packers had trouble moving the ball, but so did the Niners, thanks to our hero and the defense. And as you can see by this picture, Reg was on the tail of Young all game long, silencing critics again about his health. After a field goal made it 24-10 late in the third, another made it 27-10, then the Niners had very little left. They had a touchdown late and succeeded with an onside kick, but Young threw an interception to Newsome, and that was the game. The Packers are going to the NFC Championship, something they have not done since the NFL-AFL merger 25 years prior. Our hero was still being deemed as, quote, slowed down by some, but he was key in containing this dominant Niners offense. And for the first time in his career after 11 seasons, he finally gets to play in a conference championship. And they face... Oh, wait, you know what? Screw that. This time, there's much more faith in the Packers. They played a beauty and eliminated the defending Super Bowl champions. If there was ever a time to finally beat the Cowboys, it's now. And hey, you know what? It did look good early. So much so, in fact, our hero on the Cowboys' first possession sacked Troy Aikman on 3rd and 10, and a block punt led the Packers to score a field goal. 3-0 they led, but Aikman then took command and got the Cowboys the lead with a Michael Irvin touchdown. And then a couple drives later, Favre threw a very costly interception that Leon Lett, who actually didn't fumble it this time, some of you know what I'm talking about, and it was zone 17, setting up another Aikman to Irvin score. It's 14-3 Cowboys. I know, here we go again. Oh, but wait, stop the presses. A huge play. Favre finds Brooks for a 73-yard touchdown, and the Packers trail by 4 after one quarter. They then took a 17-14 lead after Favre hit Keith Jackson from 24 yards out. The defense was doing quite well against the high-powered Cowboys for the most part. The Cowboys did tie on a field goal and would also take a 24-17 lead at the half, but there was no need to panic. And as a matter of fact, on the first drive of the third quarter, a field goal closed the gap to 24-20, and the Pack held the Cowboys to just 8 yards the next drive, and then Favre engineered a very smart drive. The Packers again led 27-24, and that's how it was after 3 quarters. The Packers are 15 minutes away from their first Super Bowl berth since Super Bowl II. But early in the fourth, the Cowboys retake the lead 31-27. Again, there's no need to panic. Favre smartly moves the ball and throws an interception on Larry Brown. 2 plays later, Emmitt Smith finds nothing but end zone. The Cowboys are again headed to the Super Bowl and would indeed win it for the 3rd time in 4 seasons. Our hero made a key play early, had a little bit of trouble the rest of the game as the rest of the Packers' defensive line, but that's just how good the Dallas offensive line was. So close, but oh so far. 3 years, 3 losses to the Cowboys, and 4 for our hero in 4 years, 4 losses. Oh, yikes. Reggie had 12 sacks, up from last year's career low of 8, sacking 8 different QBs this year, and was tied for 6th in the league in the category. And all but 2.5 were either on Hall of Famers or past or present and future Pro Bowlers. Once again, Warren Moon and Chris Miller are his prime targets. Since White's moved to the Central Division, Warren Moon can't escape him since he joined the Vikings. In addition to Moon, for the first time in a while, White got one in on Troy Aikman for the first time since leaving the Eagles, while Jeff Blake, in his Pro Bowl season and behind one of the best offensive lines in the league, still met good old number 92. And former teammate or not, Mark Brunell wasn't saved, neither was young Trent Dilfer. And in an obscure file goes Eric Zaire. And 3.5 sacks out of 12 were on top 10 offensive lines. I mentioned the Bengals, and he thrived against the number 1 line in the league, the Bears, and the second best, the Cowboys. Well, despite lingering injuries, he did get one in the playoffs, and it was on Troy Aikman in the NFC Championship on the first drive of the game for the Cowboys. Reggie was in a 5-way tie for 3rd place for Defensive Player of the Year with just 2 votes. Many feel he was shortchanged, and the man who won it, dominating the voting as a matter of fact, former teammate Bryce Paup, now with the Bills. A huge year for our hero. Many feel it's one of the most overlooked of his career. He proved his naysayers wrong, not just increasing his statistics, but if they wanted the Reggie White from Philly, well, that's pretty much what they got. However, his streak of 3 straight second-team All-Pro selections comes to an end because, for the first time since 1991, and the 7th time in his career, he is a first-team All-Pro once again. And yes, so 10 straight Pro Bowl selection, the Packers' first division title in 13 years, and their first appearance in the conference championship since the merger 25 years prior. But now our hero's health was being called into question. Reggie White was about to enter his 12th NFL season in 1996, and his health was being called into question, and nearing 35 years old, the doubters were out there. He showed in 1995 that he's still among the best, but his problems towards the end of the season and the playoffs had people thinking the wear and tear had gotten to be too much. As for the Packers, it was 50-50 on their consensus, it seemed. Some said last season just showed that they have another hill to climb, and it's a step towards them reaching the top. Others say their time may have already passed them by. But one way or another, one thing most people agreed on, it was Super Bowl or bust. The Packers made a couple of additions to their team in the off-season. They made some key acquisitions from the Jacksonville Jaguars. First was 9-year veteran offensive tackle Bruce Wilkerson, and the other was return specialist and former Heisman Trophy winner Desmond Howard, who had a decent career thus far, but the top prospect from 1992 is being deemed a bust at this point. On defense, to give Reg a little something extra, they added Santana Dotson to give the defensive line more depth, and then a huge grab at safety, Eugene Robinson, a former Pro Bowler from the Seattle Seahawks, to complement Leroy Butler. Is this team finally complete enough to be a champion? Well, they certainly started the season right. A 3-game winning streak right out of the gate. Reg recovered a fumble on a 34-3 win over the Bucks, and then faced his former team, though this Eagles team is drastically different from the one he remembers, but they swarmed Rodney Peete the whole game. And our hero had 2 sacks and a dominant win over the Chargers. 3 games, 3-0, a combined score of 115-26. The offense was rolling. The entire Packers defense, led by our hero, was on a whole other level now. 2.5 sacks and a fumble recovery in this stretch. White had another fumble recovery against the Vikings, but the Packers would lose the game 30-21. And now the Vikings at 4-0 are ahead of the Packers in the NFC Central, but then a huge 5-game winning streak in a 31-10 win over Seattle. Our hero had an interception, returning at 46 yards, setting up a field goal, and then 37-6 over the Bears. The Niners, however, put up a fight as backup Elvis Gerbach was at the helm, and it took a 23-20 win by the Pack to take it, but Elvis wasn't exactly saying thank you very much to Reg. It was also a very close game against the surprising Buccaneers team this week, 13-7. But the normally potent Bucs offensive line, as veteran Doug Reisenberg, who squared off against Reg as a member of the Giants for many years in his battles with the Eagles, was no match for our hero on this day. And then in a 28-18 win over the Lions, former Packer Pro Bowl QB Don Majkowski who Reg had met 5 years prior, decided to have a reunion. How nice! The Packers were 8-1, and just didn't look like they could really be stopped at this point. If he was hurt, he certainly was good at hiding it, as Reggie was doing what he did better than any stat could say, and that's taking command of this defense, which is now one of the best in the league this season. They did drop a tough 27-20 loss to the Chiefs and fall to 8-2, and then Yep, those damn Cowboys again. Their worst loss of the year, 21-6, and kept Dallas from scoring touchdowns, but not 7 field goals. But here we go again. A 24-9 win over the lamest show on turf, the St. Louis Rams, and the Bears' great offensive line is being tranquilized by our hero in a 28-17 win for the Pack. And what was being deemed as a possible Super Bowl preview, the Packers just handed the Broncos their second loss of the year, 41-6, but then again, it wasn't much of a Super Bowl preview with John Elway out of action. So we certainly hoped that wouldn't be one. But they also had Terrell Davis, and they limited him to 54 yards rushing. And with that win, the Packers, for the second straight year, clinched the NFC Central, and our hero had a huge game against the Lions with 2 sacks and a 31-3 win. Sanders was held under 100 yards. And to end the season, good news for Warren Moon. He didn't have to encounter Reg, but Brad Johnson did, and the Packers sent a message to their rivals with a 38-10 win. The Packers not only finished 13-3, their best season ever since the merger, and finished atop the NFC Central for the first time since the merger. They also finished first overall in the entire NFC for the first time. Oh, hell, you get it. But I do have to add, their offense scored the most points, their defense allowed the least. The last team to accomplish that, the 1972 Miami Dolphins, who were undefeated and won the Super Bowl. But playoff disappointments were still in the back of the head of many. But now the Packers get the big bye to the divisional round, and awaiting them are the very team they just shocked last year, the San Francisco 49ers, only the game will take place at Lambeau Field. The Niners finished 12-4, which is actually good enough for second in the NFC West, but only the 4th time since their first Super Bowl in 1981 they failed to accomplish finishing first. And the game pretty much belonged to the Packers from the word go. After an opening possession from the Niners was forced to a punt, Desmond Howard returned at 71 yards for a touchdown. Shortly after that, the Niners' star quarterback Steve Young was injured, and the Packers' defense just was destroying them after that. Then later in the quarter, another huge return from Howard set up Favre, finding Andre Rison in the end zone. The Packers lead 14-0 after the first quarter. An interception by Newsom set up an Edgar Bennett 2-run-yard touchdown, and it's 21-0 for the Pack, but the Niners closed the gap to 21-7 for the half. Our hero is playing his heart out. He wants nothing less than to be a champion, and is giving reliable backup QB from the Niners and future Pro Bowler Elvis Gerbach a lot to handle. Early in the third quarter, the Niners are still very much in it and make it 21-14. But then Favre engineers a smart drive leading to a strange touchdown where Edgar Bennett fumbles the ball, which was recovered in the end zone by Antonio Freeman. It's 28-14. The defense, however, stand their ground the rest of the way. The Packers will add one more touchdown from Bennett, and they're headed to the second straight NFC Championship with a 35-14 win. The defense was incredible, holding San Francisco to under 200 yards, and star receiver Jerry Rice to just 36. Was this finally going to be the time? Well, our hero was determined to make it so. But a whole new foe awaited them. The Carolina Panthers, in just their second year of existence, shocked the Niners by winning the NFC West. And on top of that, did in 1 year what the Packers failed to do in 3. Beat the Cowboys in a playoff game. The Panthers had a tremendous team coached by a great football mind, Dom Capers. They were led by quarterback Kerry Collins, a former top-tier college prospect. They had dynamic tight end in Wes Wells, speedy receiver and former Olympic bronze medal winner Michael Bates, but he would actually miss this game. They had a young yet formidable offensive line, but the defense, well, was the second best in the league, ranked behind the Packers. Former longtime Steelers fan favorite Gerald Williams led the defensive line, and in the secondary you had former Niners star Eric Davis leading the way. But that linebacking core was the heart of this team. Former Saints star and future Hall of Famer Sam Mills, and Lamar Lathan having a career year, and he had a character player in Carlton Bailey, but leading the way was mean Kevin Green, a contemporary of our hero for many years, and even they had their kicker John Casey, who was one of the best in the league. And it looked very bleak early on. Favre threw a costly pick, allowing Carolina to get in the game and strike first with a touchdown and led 7-0, and that's how it would stay after one quarter. However, early in the second, Favre found Dorsey Levens from 29 yards out to tie the game, but the Panthers struck back with a field goal and took the lead back 10-7. But after a smart 15-play, 71-yard drive, Favre hit Freeman from 6 yards out, and the Packers led again 14-10. The Packers had a field goal and led by a touchdown at the half. But in the second half, our hero steps up, adding more pressure to Collins as the Pro Bowl QB makes a lot of mistakes. The two teams exchange field goals in their respective first drives of the third quarter, however, and it's 20-13 for the Pack. But then the game was put out of reach thanks to a 66-yard pass and run play from Favre to Levens, setting up Bennett's 4-yard touchdown run as the Packers led 27-13. As our hero on the defense was giving the Panthers nothing, they add a field goal to drive the nail in the Green Bay Bay Packers, for the first time since Super Bowl II, which was their last championship, are going to the Super Bowl. And oh yes, our hero, the minister, number 92, Reg. After 12 seasons, he's finally going to be playing in the big game. But make no mistake about it, he's not there to play. He's there to win it all. For all the work he has put in both Philly and Green Bay, this is what the moment he has waited to seize more than any other. Long regarded as the best at what he does in the entire league, he now has the chance that he has poured every fiber of his being into achieving, being a champion. He came to Green Bay to accomplish this very thing, and can he at long last truly seize the moment? And here we are, Super Bowl 31. Standing opposite them, the AFC champion New England Patriots. Long before the days of Tom Brady, the guy who turned their team from zeros to heroes in this era is QB and former number 1 draft pick in 1993, Drew Bledsoe. First in the AFC East with an 11-5 record, coached by a man who knows Reggie quite well, Bill Parcells, who garnered 2 Super Bowl rings as the head coach of the New York Giants, coaching against Reggie's Eagles many times. The Pats dominated the defending AFC champions Steelers 28-3, and then the second-year Jacksonville Jaguars 20-6 in the AFC Championship that clinched the Super Bowl for just their second time in their history, that first being back in 1985. Supporting Drew in the backfield, the great Curtis Martin in just his second year. Well, who does he have to throw to? How about rookie star Terry Glenn, who had over 1,100 yards, or Pro Bowl tight end Ben Coates? I should also mention Reggie's longtime Eagles teammate Keith Byers was added to the team during the season to provide a little more depth. The offensive line tied for giving up the 7th least amount of sacks in the league, and they were led by one of the best in the league, Pat's great Bruce Armstrong. And their defense had great success against the rush. Up front, young Willie McGinnis, who had a breakout year, and in the linebacking core, the underrated Todd Collins, young Ted Johnson, and big Chris Slade. They didn't get the recognition, however, that they deserved. Their secondary was wishy-washy at times, but you have future Hall of Famer Ty Law, so it can't be all bad. Can't go wrong with him. Special teams? Ah, yes. A red-hot rookie kicker, Adam Vinatieri, former QB turned punter, Tom Tupa, and a man who can counter Desmond Howard's returning ability, someone who Reg knows very well, former Giant, Dave Meggett. The site, the New Orleans Superdome. The date, January 26, 1997, will the promised land finally be realized. And here we go. The Pats opened the game in the first drive, but were forced to punt. And then on the first play from scrimmage, Favre hits Andre Rison from 54 yards out. It's a touchdown. The Packers shock the Pats, leading 7-0. Bledsoe then throws a costly interception, and then Jackie hits a field goal. It's 10-0 for the Packers. But Bledsoe shook it off, and White was having trouble getting to the star QB, at least this early portion of the game. And 2 big throws to Martin and Byers eventually set up a touchdown to Byers from 1 yard out. The Pats close the gap to 10-7. The Packers, however, have trouble moving the ball, and the Pats defense steps up. And then after a 44-yard pass to Glenn, Bledsoe finds Coates from 4 yards out. The Pats have come back, and they lead 14-10. That's how this exciting first quarter ends. But Favre realized the secondary is what he needs to expose, and early in the second quarter, connects with Freeman for an 81-yard touchdown play. The Packers have the lead back 17-14. The pressure is now coming on to Bledsoe, and our hero was now a big part of it. A 23-yard pass to Rison sets up a field goal, and then a Mike Pryor pick gives the Packers more points, as after a huge completion to Freeman, Bennett, and Levin's run game took over, and Favre eventually runs it himself. It's 27-14. The Packers, by golly, lead by 13 at the half. The Pack get the ball to begin the second half, but they can't put the game out of reach. But later in the quarter, the Pats get into it, thanks to a huge 18-yard Curtis Martin run. It's 27-21. But then on the ensuing kickoff on the 1 yard line, Desmond Howard returns it all the way back in one of the most memorable plays in Super Bowl history, the longest return at the time in Super Bowl history, and a successful 2-point convert made the game 35-21. Cue our hero. There was no way he was going to let the Pats back in this game. As a matter of fact, on the Pats' next drive, Reg hit Bledsoe hard, but he was still able to get a completion off the Byers, setting up 2nd and 5. But then even as commentators John Madden and Pat Summerall were praising our hero and his great career and in this game, he got to Bledsoe sacking him for a huge loss of 18 yards, setting up 3rd and 13. And then on the next snap, here's Reggie sacking Bledsoe for a 6-yard loss, ending the drive, and John Madden said it best, Reggie White is going to take over this game now. The fourth quarter, the Packers still led by 14. The Pack can't add to the lead, but Reggie and company are still causing Bledsoe to make many mistakes, including another interception. The Packers, however, miss a field goal, and late in the fourth quarter, time is ticking down. The Pats are looking to be done, especially after a Santana Dotson sack on 3rd down. The Pats had the ball, however, in the dying minutes, and to put an exclamation point, Reggie took down Bledsoe for a 3rd time. Then Max Lane, the promising O-lineman was tasked with guarding Reg, was taken to school the entire game. What a great day for our hero indeed. A record 3 sacks in one Super Bowl game. And Bledsoe turns the ball over again. 3, 2, 1. The Green Bay Packers. Reggie White. Super Bowl champions. The playmaker, the game changer, the minister of defense, number 92. Now you call him champion. His 3 sacks, 2 of which came at a most crucial time. He indeed took command of the entire game after the Pack had built that 14-point lead that led to their 35-21 win. This journey culminates in storybook fashion. And while it didn't shock anyone he came up big in this game, it truly emphasized just why he is valuable wherever he goes. He proudly clutched the Lombardi Trophy. And there were a lot of people who wouldn't blame Reg if he retired at this moment. But he wasn't finished. White had 8.5 sacks this year, but sacked 9 QBs. But 3.5 were against top offensive lines, such as the Bears, the Bucks, and the Chargers. Scott Mitchell, who was looking to have a promising career, was White's top target this year, and a lot of future stars, Brad Johnson, Elvis Gerbach, and Trent Dilfer, also incurred his wrath. And he reunited with a lot of QBs this year, especially former Packers star Don Majkowski, who he last sacked in 1981, and Stan Humphries of the Chargers, who Reg last got to when he was playing for the Redskins back in 1990. Also in the year Dave Craig became the most sacked quarterback in NFL history, Reg helped him get there. But of course the story was the Super Bowl and how he took a young offensive lineman who was part of the 7th best in the league to task, and how one of the best QBs in the game at the time, in his Pro Bowl season no less, stood in his way of being champion. Reg made it known to him it wasn't gonna happen. Well, what can you say? Our hero finally did it. He finally did it. How he changed his Packers team from the moment he arrived was something to behold. Some say he was snubbed for Super Bowl MVP, which went to Desmond Howard, who did have one of the best special team performances of all time, but still Reg's record, 3 sacks in a Super Bowl game, was something that a lot of people still look at to this day. But in all honesty, to me, it looked as if Reggie was more than happy to just have the Lombardi Trophy in his grasp, knowing that he was one of the primary reasons for it happening. Not just the day, but in the last 4 seasons, it truly meant everything. On top of his crowning achievement, he was again selected to the Pro Bowl for the 11th straight time, was a second-team All-Pro. What a year! And he wasn't done. Reggie White and the Packers reached the top of the mountain, and what was next, you may ask? Their goal is to stay there, and of course, some wrestling! Yes, indeed, Reggie White made his way back into the wrestling world 2 years after being in the corner of Lawrence Taylor at WrestleMania 11, and got in the ring himself at WCW Slamboree 1997, and faced his old pal / nemesis Mongo Steve McMichael. Yeah, the less said about that match, actually, the better, to be fair. But moving on. So yes, indeed, many were touting the Packers as the next big dynasty in the NFL. They did suffer some losses in the offseason as Super Bowl MVP Desmond Howard signed a lucrative deal with the Raiders. Sean Jones actually retired. Andre Rison signed with the Chiefs. But the Packers were still a huge odds-on favorite. White also had Santana Dotson, Gilbert Brown, as well as Gabe Wilkins with him. And joining the club, a man Reggie knew very well, linebacker Seth Joyner, coming off a 3-season stint with the Cardinals. Well, let's see if our hero can lead the Pack back to the promised land. Monday Night Football was the perfect way for our champs to be honored by their hometown crowd, and they started the season right with a 38-24 win over the Bears, as Reg and the defensive line made Eric Kramer long for Tuesday morning to come already. Despite Reg and company exposing the Eagles' very weak offensive line, Favre threw some very bad incompletions and couldn't find the end zone in a 10-9 loss. While Reg, or anyone else for that matter, didn't register a sack, they did put Dan Marino under a lot of pressure. He in turn played a terrible game, but the Pack still barely slipped by the Dolphins 23-18. The Packers then, however, nearly blew a 31-7 lead, but survived and won over the hated Vikings 38-32. And the 9th best offensive line that year in Minnesota and QB Brad Johnson caught Reggie's rage. The Packers are now 3-1. But then they lose to a division rival, Detroit this time, 25-16, and this brought out some skeptics in terms of certain chances. Whereas Reggie and the defense played well, but at 3-2, still early in the season, the naysayers came out. Well, the Packers took it to a much improved and new-look Buccaneers team, 21-16, and our hero had 2 sacks as the Bucs tied for the 5th best offensive line that year, as sophomore Jason Odom couldn't keep Reggie contained, and Trent Dilfer couldn't withstand the onslaught. They held off the Bears 24-23, and then in a Super Bowl rematch, the Packers beat the Pats 28-10, and Reg had a fumble recovery. They then got the better of the Lions this time 20-10, as they just made Scott Mitchell practically beg for mercy with 4 sacks, and our hero getting 1 of them. And then a 17-7 win over the Rams, where Mark Rypien and Tony Banks ran like Godzilla was after them trying to dodge Reg. And it was deja vu, and in a good way, as the Pack sat at 8-2 atop the NFC Central. But in what had to be an upset, probably the biggest upset of the year, the Colts, who were 0-10, beat the Packers 41-38 to a last-second field goal. This one was a heartbreaker in more ways than one, but of course, oh boy, the Cowboys, who they avoided in the playoffs last year, but still can't seem to beat otherwise, and regardless, and well, this time, a 45-17 thrashing of their rivals, and it definitely lifted their spirits out of that sad loss against Indy. Also, a 27-11 win over the Vikings, where Brad Johnson was on the turf more than the paint, 6 times total. Reggie was in on 2.5 of those. The Bucs again got destroyed, Dilfer getting hit so hard his hair was growing back, and hey, I can say that, I'm balding. And a rematch of the NFC Championship against the Panthers, pretty much the same result. And Alex Van Pelt, meet Reggie White. And the Packers win 31-21, another 5-game winning streak. And so let's see, 13-3 again, check. NFC Central Champions, 3rd year in a row, check. Tie for the best record in the NFC, check. The Packers were well on their way to a dynasty. And again, with the bye to the divisional round, this year they face a new foe. Well, at least new in the playoffs, but definitely far from new in general. Their division rivals, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who finished 11-5, had one of their best seasons in franchise history. Coached by the great Tony Dungy, the team had come together at last after making some great draft picks and developing a winner. Trent Dilfer, a top-tier prospect QB, was truly coming into his own, but was a favorite target of our hero since his rookie year, pretty much. He had the dangerous backfield of Mike Allstott and Warwick Dunn. Up front in the trenches, you had a fantastic offensive line led by Tony Mayberry and Paul Gruber. And that defense, the second best ranked defense in the entire league. The defensive line was led by a guy who so many teams passed up on due to rumors, named Warren Sapp. And the linebacking core, led by another young gun from the same draft class as Sapp, Derek Brooks. And joining him was veteran Hardy Nickerson. And leading the secondary was strong safety John Lynch. They could give the Pack a lot to handle. So here we go, Battle of the Bays, and Warren Sapp is sending messages to Favre early on, flushing him out and dishing out some decent punishment. But our hero is in the face of Dilfer, who wants to avoid number 92 like the plague. The Pack, however, do indeed strike first. A blocked field goal eventually leads to Favre finding Chamorro to go up 7-0, and that's how it would stay after one quarter. Both teams' defenses in the second quarter are insane, and Sapp is continuing to get to Favre, and even sacks him despite Green Bay's stellar offensive line. They just can't contain him. But White isn't giving Dilfer an easy day, and the Pack would boot 2 field goals and go up 13-0 at the half. The Bucs, however, do get on the board in the third quarter after a touchdown by Allstott. However, the battle of the defenses continued, and it was 13-7 after 3 quarters. However, early in the fourth, the Packers put it away. A touchdown from Levens and a 2-point convert made it 21-7. And our hero and the defense hang on, as for a third straight year, the Packers are headed to the NFC Championship. Reggie was playing with that trademark intensity that we know and love, and now he's a step closer to going back to the big game. And now in the NFC Championship, they take on for the third straight year the San Francisco 49ers, but this time they have a healthy Steve Young to contend with. And despite only having Jerry Rice for 2 games all year, they have a new star in the receiving corps, a fellow by the name of Terrell Owens, who had a breakout year. And this year, the game was in San Francisco. The team has had similar records, but of course tiebreaker rules meant San Francisco would host the game. But being on the road wasn't going to stymie our hero or the Packers. The Pack struck first with a field goal, and it stayed 3-0 Packers after 1. Reggie was always right in Steve Young's zone the whole game, it seemed, and the future Hall of Fame QB tried everything in his power to avoid him. And in the second quarter, after a pick from Robinson, 2 plays later, Favre finds Freeman in the end zone, and it's 10-0. The Niners got on the board with a field goal, but on the last play of the half, the Packers also kicked one, and then they led 13-3 at halftime. The Packers' defense was insane in the third quarter. Young and the gang couldn't get any momentum, and it remained 13-3. Ryan Longwell, who was the new kicker of the team, kicked his third field goal of the game at 16-3 for the Pack. On the Niners' next drive, our hero obtains a sack and caused a fumble, but it was recovered by the Niners. But that really didn't matter as the Packers got the ball back, and thanks to a Keith McKenzie sack, the ball turned over on downs. And 2 plays later, Levins runs in from 5 yards out. It's 23-3. On the ensuing kickoff, the Niners did return it all the way for a touchdown, but time had pretty much run out on their chances. The Packers are going back to the Super Bowl. Our hero was again stellar. He and the whole defense made life miserable for the Niners, who some were expecting to pull it off. And now, a year after finally being a champion, Reggie White has the chance to help build a new dynasty. And here we go, Super Bowl 32, and awaiting them the 12-4 Denver Broncos, making their first Super Bowl appearance in Super Bowl 24. A team on the rise after some lean years in the 90s, coached by the guiding force known as Mike Shanahan, and the man who has been at the helm for them since 1983, the man who our hero has had great success getting to in the past, John Elway. Well, he was now in his 15th season and still looking for his first championship. And the biggest star at this point, however, was running back Terrell Davis, who rushed for over 1,700 yards. They had a talented receiving corps of Ed McCaffrey, Rod Smith, and tight end Shannon Sharp, brother of Reggie's former teammate on Green Bay, Sterling. They had a solid offensive line led by Gary Zimmerman. And the man tasked with taking on our hero, however, is veteran Tony Jones, a popular fixture of the Cleveland Browns for many years in his first year at the Broncos, and Pro Bowl center, leading it all, Tom Nellen. Also, the Broncos' defense had a great deal of depth up front. 6-time Pro Bowler Neil Smith, after 9 seasons with the Chiefs, was a Bronco. Joining him was Alfred Williams, and leading the linebacking corps was veteran Bill Romanowski, and in the secondary, the great Steve Atwater. But the Packers were the heavy favorites by 11 points. Oh, here we go. January 25th, 1998, San Diego, California. The Packers dynasty one step away from becoming that very word, and it looks great early. The Packers struck with a touchdown on their first drive after a 22-yard touchdown from Favre to Freeman, but the Broncos tied. It was 7-7 after the first quarter. In the second quarter, the Broncos took a 17-7 lead, and the whole time White had gotten close to Elway a few times, but it seemed as though Tony Jones was doing a pretty formidable job of keeping Reggie at bay somewhat. Well, the Pack closed the gap with a brilliant 17-play drive from Favre, culminating in a 6-yard touchdown to Chimura. And at the half, it's 17-14 for the Broncos. In the third, Reggie was within arm's reach of Elway many times, but could never really get to him. And it was the Broncos' running game, however, doing the damage. Terrell Davis was just on another level. However, the Pack did tie at 17-17 after gaining 39 yards on one drive. However, Davis ends it with a touchdown. It's 24-17, the Broncos after 3. Eugene Robinson, who has been huge for the Pack in the past couple seasons, makes a key interception and sets up an Antonio Freeman touchdown. The game is tied 24-24 as time is winding down in the fourth. And hey, this is where I'd like to say cue our hero, but the Broncos took a 31-24 lead with just 1:47 remaining. The Pack looked like they could tie this thing as they got to the Bronco 35, but after a 4-yard gain from Levins and 3 straight incompletions, the Packers lose the Super Bowl. Reggie played his heart out like he always does, but it just wasn't his night, nor was it the Packers' night, as the hopes of building a dynasty, well, they take a seat. Reggie White's 11 sacks were the 10th best in the league, and he sacked 6 different QBs. And the caliber of the QBs wasn't as deep as previous years, but 6.5 sacks, 3.5 on Brad Johnson and 3 on Trent Dilfer respectively, again, 2 future Pro Bowlers who he has targeted successfully in the past, especially in the case of Dilfer. But they both had top 10 offensive lines, as the Bucs had the 5th best blocking corner in the league, also the Vikings had the 9th. Scott Mitchell and Eric Kramer again run afoul at number 92. And in the obscure file, we have Alex Van Pelt to the Bills. And in his bid for another Super Bowl, Reggie White did get a sack in the playoffs on Steve Young in the NFC Championship. Despite coming up short for a repeat bid of becoming champion, it was another great year for our hero. 10th best in sacks, once again a Pro Bowler for the 12th straight time, and a second-team All-Star for the second straight year, and the 5th time in his career. And in all but his rookie year at this point, he was on an All-Pro team, either first or second level. And indeed, played in his second straight Super Bowl. He, however, for the first time since his sophomore NFL season in 1986, he didn't achieve a Defensive Player of the Year vote for a second straight year. Rumors of his retirement actually started running rampant. Despite the rumors, Reggie White felt it was his calling to return for his 14th NFL season and his 16th as a pro. The Packers were still considered among the elite teams in the league, and many believed, including fans, experts, pundits, and more importantly Reggie and the team themselves, that they could get back there despite the setback. They did lose Eugene Robinson, however, to the Atlanta Falcons, which would deal a huge blow to their secondary. But Reggie, approaching 37 years old, was ready to truly prove he's an ageless wonder at another level. And nobody, even the biggest Reggie White fans, could have expected what this season could bring. A huge start out of the gate, a win over the Lions 38-19 and holding Barry Sanders to just 70 yards, and Reggie not giving Scott Mitchell any breathing room. But then the next week against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, it was just on a whole different level. 3 sacks on Trent Dilfer, and the Bucs' Jason Odom was pushed back like he was on a slip and slide, and White was as ferocious as ever, and many took notice of his performance, and that he didn't have to say it. He just showed that he was far from done, and still among the top elite in the league. In a 13-6 win over the Bengals, White again just seemed to be right in the face of a QB after a given snap. This time his target was Neil O'Donnell of the Cincinnati Bengals, and he along with Keith McKenzie helped bring him down for a sack, helping hold the Bengals to just 179 yards of offense and only 7 first downs. Reggie now has 5.5 sacks in just 4 games as the Packers moved to 4-0, and he's gotten to Kerry Collins twice in a big 37-30 win over the Carolina Panthers. Reggie, again, was sparking comparisons to his 1987 season, where he's playing with that extra intensity. And despite how Reggie has been great on Green Bay, there again were a few out there who long for the Reggie White of the Eagles. Careful what you wish for. However, they ran into their red-hot division rivals, the Minnesota Vikings, who I've covered on this channel of this very season, and Reggie couldn't get in the vicinity of former teammate Randall Cunningham enough to put any significant pressure on, and the Pack suffered their first loss, 37-24. White then, however, gave a rude welcome to rookie QB Charlie Batch, but the Detroit Lions stunned the Packers 27-20, but once again, Reggie was making headlines for his play this season. It seemed losing the Super Bowl motivated him to the point where he was just unstoppable. The Pack would bounce back in a 28-10 win over the Ravens, and where White would lead an onslaught against the lowly club. But wow, what a game he would have against the 49ers, as in a 36-22 win, the Pack defense sacked Steve Young 9 times, our hero obtaining 3. Reg had 11 sacks in just 8 games. Remarkable. The way the Packers defense was yet again responding to our hero's presence was uncanny. The Pack, however, suffered a loss to the Steelers, 27-20. Red spent much of the game chasing down speedy quarterback Cordell Stewart, and did manage to get him once in a tireless effort. And the more things changed, the more they stayed the same. Sure, Reg was down a different division, but like throughout his whole career, if you're wearing a New York Giants jersey, chances are Reg is gonna kill ya. And Danny Cannell had that happen as the Pack obliterated this lowly Giants team 37-3. But again, the Pack ran into a red-hot Vikings team who was running away with the NFC Central. And while Reg was able to add more pressure to Cunningham than the last time, the Pack still lost to their heated rivals 28-14. And for what would turn out to be his last game in his career against his former team, he would play the Philadelphia Eagles, a team that shaped him into the star that he is. And now he goes after Coy Detmer, brother of Ty, and makes his day a living hell, and the Packers win 24-16. The Packers lost a narrow game to the Bucs 24-22, meaning they fall to 8-5, meaning the Vikings had that day moved to 12-1, officially clinching the NFC Central, ending the 3-year reign of the Packers as division champions. However, the Packers were still sitting pretty in a good position with a wildcard spot. And the Pack ended the season strong, a 26-20 win over the Bears, and Reggie and the gang were all over poor Steve Stenstrom, or better known as his given name, who? and they were securing a playoff spot, and they continued with a 30-22 win over the Oilers despite not putting much pressure on young Aaron McNair, and capped off their season with a tight 16-13 win over the Bears and finished 11-5, and for the 6th straight season were headed to the playoffs. Hey, this should be easy again, right? Look at they're facing for the 4th straight year, the San Francisco 49ers. The Niners are pretty much becoming what Dallas had been to Green Bay for years, and now the Niners have a dangerous man in the backfield, however, by the name of Garrison Hurst, and Jerry Rice is healthy this go-around. Well, here we go, once again in San Francisco, and it looked good early on, as a turnover early in the game gave the Packers the ball and set up Longwell's field goal, and the Packers, however, also fumbled the ball, and this allows San Fran to go up 7-3. And that's how it would stay after one quarter, but late in the frame and going into the second, the Pack were on a drive, and Favre finds Freeman from 2 yards out, and the Pack lead 10-7. The game is soon tied, however, 10-10, and our hero is playing very well, putting pressure on Steve Young, which causes him to go to Hurst more often, which, however, does some damage. But again, turnovers are the story. The Pack get a huge interception, setting up a TD by Levens from 2 yards out, and they lead 17-10 at the half. But then early in the third, it's Favre throwing a costly pick himself, setting up a San Fran touchdown. It's 17-17. The Niners kill significant time off the clock to add a field goal, making it 20-17, and that's how it would stay after 3. Reggie was trying his damnedest to keep the Niners at bay, and the Packers did add a field goal, and it was tied at 20. The Niners, however, respond with one of their own, and they have a 23-20 lead. Favre, however, throws another pick, which looked like it could be the game, but thankfully, our hero and the defense lead to a 3-and-out, and the Pack got the ball back. And with 2 minutes to play, Favre to Freeman, 15 yards out, it's 27-23 Packers. However, like Steve Young's former mentor, Joe Montana, he went to work and made a smart strategic drive. Reggie and the guys did what they could, but it didn't seem to be working. Then with 8 seconds to play, Terrell Owens makes what is known in San Fran as the catch-2. A spectacular TD with 8 seconds to play. The Packers, for the first time since Reggie arrived, failed to win a playoff game. A sad end to a spectacular season. Reggie was there, but it wasn't enough. The Niners finally shook off the Pack off their back. And, however, they would lose in the divisional round to the Falcons. But either way, the Packers' dominance of the NFC in this era had come to an end. Reggie White had 16 sacks, the highest mark he ever reached during his tenure in Green Bay, and sacked 9 different QBs. 7 of his sacks, nearly half, were on top 10 offensive line teams. And his favorite targets that year, Steve Young and surprise, Trent Dilfer, 3 times each. But the crazy thing is that the other 7 QBs are ones he has never sacked before. Insane. White still showed he could come up big and keep up with his generation. And White's 16 sacks was just half a sack back of league leader Michael Sinclair of the Seattle Seahawks. It would have been the first time White had led the league in sacks since 1988 had he gotten just one more. But either way, an incredible feat. First time he's finished in the top 5 since his first year with the Packers in 1993, and accomplishes this for the 7th time in his 14 seasons. And guess what? With over 42.5% of the vote, Reggie White, for the first time since 1987, and the 2nd time in his career, is named Defensive Player of the Year. His determination, his leading by example, and the way he makes given plays happen were still unmatched at this point in his career. A year that may have been one of the best individually of his career, and some argue rival 1987. Considering where he was at this point in his career, plus how he'd grown even further as a leader since then, it's easy to make that argument. In addition to his huge Defensive Player of the Year win, he is named First-Team All-Pro for the first time since 1995, and the 8th time in his illustrious career. And oh yes, lucky number 13 straight Pro Bowl selection. Reggie White was still truly at the top. Many thought he could go to the new millennium with a season like this. However, in a somewhat abrupt fashion, he retired shortly after the season ended, as some felt with the year he had, he was far from done, as Packers fans and fans across the NFL were saddened by the news. But after 14 seasons and all the accolades, what more could he really accomplish, I guess? And he leaves a tremendous legacy behind in both Green Bay and Philly. He came to Green Bay with the purpose of being a major cornerstone in this team, building a winner at long last, and indeed it paid dividends. Not only did the defense become great, but the team as a whole responded to his mere presence. In his 6 seasons there, he was a team pro, first team twice, including his last year in 1998, and second team All-Pro 4 times. His streak of Pro Bowls that began during his second year in Philly continued through all 6 seasons in Green Bay. And on top of it all, was named to the 75th anniversary team, Defensive Player of the Year for the 2nd time in his final year, Super Bowl champion, playing in 2 Super Bowl games, winning in the first, and putting on a memorable performance in the Super Bowl win with a record 3 sacks, and once again leaving a legacy behind, ingraining himself in Packers lore. So much to say about number 92. What really can you say? Well, the Packers said a lot by retiring the number 92, one of only 6 players to receive the honor in Green Bay, and he's also in the team's Hall of Fame. In addition to being one of the best, he was also one of the most loved in Packers history. Indeed, 1999 saw no Reggie White playing pro football, and the Packers missed the playoffs. And as the 21st century arrived, Reggie received another honor, being named to the All-1990s Decade Team for the NFL. But unexpectedly, in the summer of the year 2000, it was announced Reggie White was coming out of retirement to join the Carolina Panthers. Well, he felt he still had something left in him, and the team bolstered a very weak offensive line, and George Seifert, the team's head coach, who had 5 Super Bowl rings, first as defensive assistant, then a defensive coordinator, and finally later head coach of the San Francisco 49ers, well, was now coaching the Panthers, and he's also the GM, had many discussions with Reggie about what could be done. The Panthers, since their shocking 12-win season in 1996, have been on a downhill trajectory, but they did have an 8-8 season in 1999 and were hoping to build on that. They did have a Pro Bowl quarterback in Steve Berline, a running back with a cool name, Tim Biakabatuka, and one of the best wideouts in the league, Mujin Muhammad. And they lost, however, star tight end West Walls. However, there wasn't much to write home about the offensive line, as they had one of the worst blocking cores in the league. And they had a great special teams returner, as Michael Bates was among one of the best in the league in that category. But let's look at where our hero will be working, and that's, of course, on the defense, which in 1999 was ranked 26th. Eugene Robinson, White's former Packers teammate, was now added to the secondary. Former Niners Pro Bowler Lee Woodall was added to the linebacking core, and Steve Seifert, who was, again, like I said, the team's GM, was adding veteran players to each group to strengthen their depth and give them that type of leadership. And obviously, when you think leadership, you think Reggie White. Joining him on the defensive line was former Cardinals Pro Bowler Eric Swan, another veteran in Sean Gilbert, and again, another veteran added to the team this season, Falcons Pro Bowler Chuck Smith. Reggie had his work cut out for him, but as always, he's up to the task in what will be his 15th NFL season. He returned to action for the first time in nearly 2 years on September 3rd, 2000, as the Panthers visited the Washington Redskins. And one of his favorite targets, Brad Johnson, was their QB, but he wasn't able to get to him, as Reg did, however, look pretty solid most of the game. But force of habit, and the Panthers lost 20-17. White then got in on the action in a 38-22 win over the 49ers, and gone were the days of Steve Young, but Rick Mirer was taken down by Reg and Mike Rucker together, and Reg now has 193 sacks on his career. In an ugly loss, 15-10 in their home opener to the Falcons, where Reggie got a great reception, he did get his first full sack of the year on veteran and former Pro Bowler Chris Chandler. After a bye week, Reggie met his old friend Troy Aikman, who he first got to in the Pivot's rookie year of 1989. Sacks him for the 7th and final time, but the Panthers drop an overtime heartbreaker 16-13. But 2.5 sacks in 4 games? Hey, Reg is looking pretty tremendous. However, the Panthers just can't find any consistency, as a 26-3 win over the Seahawks followed, where our hero put on a lot of pressure on Brock Heward, but was nowhere to be found in a 24-6 loss to the New Orleans Saints the next week. But again, they had San Fran's number, and Reg got a sack on Pro Bowl QB that year, and former Canadian Football League star Jeff Garcia. But was ineffective, again against the Panthers, blew a 12-3 lead in the fourth quarter to the Falcons, losing 13-12. With the Panthers 3-5, it was time for our hero to step up, and that's exactly what he did. In a huge 27-24 upset over the defending Super Bowl champion St. Louis Rams, Reg was a beast, with 2 sacks on Trent Green, a future Pro Bowler subbing in for Kurt Warner, and helped hand the Rams just their second loss of the entire season. His sack on Green late in the fourth quarter was the 198th of his career, and came on November 5, 2000, 15 years since he recorded career sack number 1 on September 29, 1985 on Giants legend Phil Simms. This would be as good as it would get for Reg and the Panthers this season. They would drop 2 losses, then win 2, but still could muster up any momentum and consistency better than that. They finished the season 7-9. Reggie would not register another sack all year, and sadly was pretty ineffective in many games. He played his final game on December 24, 2000, the 232nd game of his career, and in 15 seasons, he has only just missed 1 game. The Panthers at 7-9, of course, missed the playoffs. For Reg, it was the first time since 1991 that with the Eagles he'd miss a postseason, and for only the 5th time in his career, would just miss it in general. In his final season, Reggie had 5.5 sacks, a career low, but still went after some good caliber talent. His last 2 sacks were on future star Trent Green. He got the Troy Aikman one last time, who actually also retired at the end of this season. Pro Bowl quarterback Jeff Garcia, as well as Rick Myra, met Reggie's wrath, but of whom were protected by the 3rd best blocking core in the league. However, while it's better late than never, Chris Chandler meets Reggie for the first time. It was the first time since his rookie year he didn't win a single accolade, and while he didn't have a bad season, he looked good in several games, but he just wasn't the same. It's not as if he wasn't trying. He didn't ever phone it in. You can never say that about him. He still showed flashes of the old Reggie, especially early in the season. The fact is, when you played as much as he has, even the best run out of steam at one point. His comeback with the Panthers wasn't necessarily seen as a failure, since he did produce on some level, but it wasn't exactly seen as a roaring success either. This time, Reggie stuck to his retirement, and while his tenure in Carolina may have been a footnote, nobody can blame the guy who dedicated himself to the game, trying to contribute one more time. It didn't seem like it was out of ego, as again, he never truly phoned it in. Despite its footnote in history, Reggie White still went out there every single one of those 16 games of his career and played with the heart that he was always trademarked for. He retired with 198 career sacks, which at the time of his retirement was first all-time. Has since been passed by Bruce Smith in 2003, who is an all-time leader with an even 200. Reggie to this day is still number 2. And speaking of those 198 sacks, let's break it down. White sacked a total of 79 different QBs. That's actually 3 more than all-time leader Bruce Smith. Reggie's favorite targets throughout his career were, of course, mainly division rivals. Obviously, to no surprise, just half a sack apart are Neil Lomax and Phil Simms, Lomax leading with 13. Of course, this was ever present during his time with the Eagles. And of course, Troy Aikman from his rookie year to his final year, getting sacked by Reg 7 times. And he usually had a really good offensive line in front of him. Trent Dilfer was another divisional burial from Reggie's time with the Packers, getting downed 8 times, but Chris Miller, oddly enough, never played in the same division as Reggie White, as the odd meeting between them, either between the Eagles and Falcons or the Packers and Rams, our hero got the better of him 6.5 times. Reggie recorded 28 sacks on future Hall of Fame quarterbacks, pretty much almost everyone he ever faced. We know he targeted Aikman the most, but he got to the class of '83, Elway, Marino, and Kelly quite often, as well as Super Bowl kingpin Joe Montana, Steve Young, Dan Fouts, and Warren Moon. Also, how about Pro Bowl quarterbacks? As again, for this criteria, we're looking at non-Hall of Fame players. He got 12.5 on QBs in their Pro Bowl year, a whopping 52 sacks on QBs who were former Pro Bowlers still playing, and for future Pro Bowlers, another huge 36.5 sacks. Meaning 101 sacks were on Pro Bowlers in any way, shape, or form. Throw in 28 Hall of Famers, that just means 69 of Reggie's sacks were on players who didn't accomplish these major feats. Also, 48.5 sacks on top 10 offensive line teams. Remarkable. In terms of playoffs, Reggie had a 10-9 record in 19 games and 10 playoff appearances in 15 seasons. He walked away with 1 Super Bowl, but played in 2 title games. And recorded 12 sacks, a quarter of which were in 1 game, and of course that big Super Bowl record against Drew Bledsoe and the Patriots in that victory. And all but a quarter were against top 10 blocking cores. It's just a truly remarkable career. White retired to a suburb of Charlotte known as Cornelius, North Carolina. Upon retirement, he did stay active in charity work, but mostly spent time with his wife and 2 children. On the morning of December 26, 2004, just 1 week after his 43rd birthday, he was rushed to hospital as for many years he had suffered from a disease called sarcoidosis that primarily affects the lungs and can also deeply affect the heart. And White also suffered from sleep apnea. He began to suffer respiratory problems that morning. Reggie White didn't survive the attack. He was pronounced dead at hospital shortly after. His sudden passing sent shockwaves throughout the NFL, and it happened on a Sunday, no less, where NFL action was actually taking place. The news was made official during an evening game on ESPN between the Browns and the Dolphins, where the sullen nature of the commentators, as well as ESPN's Chris Berman, was visible in the announcement. Tributes poured out all across the league from teammates, as well as many of the peers he went up against, and of course, his legions of fans. And for sure, his ability on the field was of course mentioned, but a lot of the tributes were more about the man he was. That's what they seem to talk about. White was posthumously inducted into the Football Hall of Fame in 2006 in Canton, Ohio. His first year of eligibility in a very moving ceremony. This picture here may not tell the story of the man, but it certainly tells the tale of just how much heart he put into what he did. Because despite his talent, you don't accomplish all this on just talent alone. How many times have we seen wasted talents in the NFL just cruise on talent alone and accomplish nothing? But here it is, 15 NFL seasons, 17 total as a pro, 2-time Defensive Player of the Year, 13-time All-Pro, 8 first-team, 5 second-team All-Pro selections, 13 consecutive Pro Bowl selections from 1986 to 98. The only time he didn't achieve a Pro Bowl or All-Pro selection at any level were on his first and last seasons. He was also a Pro Bowl MVP in his very first appearance. He was named to both the All-80s and 90s decade teams, the 75th anniversary team, and in 2019 was named to the 100th anniversary team. He still holds NFL records for 1.75, that's 1 3/4 sacks a game in 1987, and led the league in sacks that year as well as 1988 back-to-back. He holds the NFL record for sacks in a Super Bowl game with 3. And speaking of which, of course, he played in 2 Super Bowls, winning Super Bowl 31 with the Green Bay Packers. His number 92 has been retired by both the Eagles and Packers, and he is part of both teams' individual Hall of Fames, and of course was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 2006. A great career, a great story, and a great man. And while he was taken from the world way too soon, Reggie White's legacy in all regards is very much alive and well. That does it for our look at the great Reggie White. What other players would you like to see us cover? Let us know in the comment section below, and also share some of your memories of the Minister of Defense. In the meantime, hit like, share the video, subscribe to the channel. Until next time, I'll see ya.